Are you an ambitious leader ready to break through limiting beliefs, align with your purpose, and thrive in your career without sacrificing your well being or postponing your true desires? I'm Diana Ordonez, certified high performance coach and your host. Each week, we'll dive into actionable insights and research based strategies to help you unlock clarity, build unshakable confidence, and take courageous action toward a life of impact and fulfillment. If you're ready to overcome fear, embrace growth, and step boldly into your next level, you're in the right place. Let's create a life filled with courage and purpose together. Hi, Cristina. I'm so excited to have you on today. Just a little bit of background. I met Cristina at the very beginning of a major career shift that she was making. I was just going through my own major shift, going through loss, and I met Cristina dancing as I was kind of healing through dancing and healing grief through dance. And just at the beginning stages of even when I started to learn about some techniques and strategies that allowed me to work through dance some of the challenges I was facing. And Cristina has taken massive courageous action, and I've watched her kind of completely transform her career, and it's so exciting that she's now working towards having her license as a licensed counselor. And so Cristina, why don't you talk a little bit about what you do and how you work with clients now?
Yeah, definitely. No, thank you for having me. And, I'm so glad that we did cross paths. And I think we really connected on the fact that our careers were somewhat similar, right? Like coaching and counseling can have a lot of overlapping features. So again, just grateful to be here and thank you for having me. But a bit about me. My name is Cristina. I'm a licensed associate counselor. I work for a company called No CD, which treats specifically anxiety disorders. Including generalized anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, specific phobias. We treat hoarding, lots of different anxiety disorders, but primarily OCD. And it's interesting. I didn't expect that I would be treating OCD in my career, but sometimes what you want to do finds you. And No CD was great because they gave us a lot of wonderful training about obsessive compulsive disorder, and I just learned how fascinating it is to treat because you see outcomes in clients and it happens sometimes really quickly and it could be such a debilitating diagnosis. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but essentially obsessive compulsive disorder is a diagnosis in which people will obsess about different thoughts, different themes, and there's usually a behavior that occurs right after to try to ease the anxiety created by the obsessive thoughts or acts. Um, but the way we treat it is to help clients face these things that they're obsessing about that causes anxiety and that causes fear. So it's very in line with your podcast because obviously the theme is like taking courageous action, right? And on a daily basis, I find that my clients are just facing their fears, they're facing their anxieties with specific techniques and skills on how to manage it. So, yeah, that's a tidbit of what I do and probably what we're going to get into today, but I love it. It's very rewarding. And I see myself sticking with the specific diagnosis moving forward.
Awesome. Awesome. I love how you frame that because it's like, yes, not all of us have OCD, but we're all kind of facing these behaviors that we take on to try to alleviate some level of anxiousness. And that anxiousness is really like so tied to our nervous system, right? And the reason I said I was kind of healing through dance is a lot of what I realized is, yes, I always kind of loved dance, but I noticed that when I would dance, it actually allowed me to cope with some of my grief because it made me so present. And what I understand now is it also kind of regulated my nervous system for that, small period of time. And as I started to learn more about the nervous system, I realized how important it is when you're coming out of like high stress situations, whether it be the pandemic or, being burnt out from work or going through a major life transition, whether that be a loss or, job loss or job change, like if you've decided that you were going to make a major shift in your career and you're kind of feeling like you're losing your identity, or it be just any major traumatic event in your life that you didn't fully process, and now you're thinking that you're looking at things in a realistic kind of way, and really all you're doing is avoiding the discomfort in your nervous system, right? So say more
Absolutely. You hit the
about
nail on the head.
and it took so many years to even like have that awareness or knowledge, or even um stop looking outside of me for the answer. Like if I could just have the perfect situation, or if I just do the right things, take the right steps, have enough knowledge, like create the perfect situation, then I wouldn't feel this way. It's like the avoidance of that discomfort, right? And so sometimes that's like a major thing when working with high performers is they're high achievers. They're all about pushing through. And what they're not realizing and doing all that mind work is that they're avoiding connecting with their bodies, right? And recognizing that all they're doing is trying to avoid the discomfort of being dysregulated in that moment. So say more about like what that looks like, and then how you walk your clients through like regulating and facing the thing that they're that they're doing, because overthinking, right, rumination is one of those things.
Absolutely. Yeah, like there's a few things that stand out to me about that I wanted to highlight. So you talked about how dancing like really helped regulate your nervous system. So our nervous system exists to protect us, to keep us alive, right? It's made up of our brain, a bunch of nerves that flow throughout our body that signal threat, right? Our brain will perceive a threat and it will send messages through our nerves into our body to warn us of threat. So if a bear just barged into your office right now, your nervous system would activate so that you could either run away, fight back, or play dead just to avoid danger, right? That's an appropriate use of your nervous system. It's trying to keep you alive in that situation. The issue is that our threats nowadays are deadlines at work, relationship concerns, um, public transportation, right? Like whatever the case may be, the threats are different. And our brains haven't necessarily, we're in the middle of evolving, but they haven't necessarily evolved to always discern between what a true threat is, like life-threatening type
Mhm.
of threat, and what is just a threat to our nervous system in regards to just having some stress and needing to navigate through that. So, what's interesting about the nervous system is when it activates, its messages do something, take action. So movement can be so helpful. Like you were talking about dance, like movement to the nervous system is like, okay, the nervous system perceives that, all right, we're doing something, we're running away, we're moving. So that's what could be so regulating about it. We're much more sedentary than we were back in the day when we were running away from prey, right? So our nervous system activates and then it has nowhere to go. So movements such as dance can be super supportive, different somatic exercises. I also have a background in yoga therapy. So slow movement, observation, breathing, these are all small somatic exercises that can be helpful and support the nervous system and feeling like, okay, we're doing something, we're taking action.
Right.
But to answer your question about how I support clients with OCD, so an example of a textbook OCD fear is contamination OCD, right? Like we'll start with that. I
Mm.
think that's what many people think of when they hear of obsessive compulsive disorder. Um, an example of some clients that I work with are an intense fear of germs, right?
Mm.
For example, touching a doorknob for most people, you can just grab a doorknob, open it, move forward, and not necessarily feel a need to wash your hands. But if you have obsessive compulsive disorder, some clients may feel like that is an intense threat, right? They need
Mhm.
to wash their hands immediately because if they don't, the threat is I will get sick. This will lead to me contaminating others. I will touch other objects after this that will potentially lead to other people touching it, which will lead to more contamination. And
Right.
unfortunately, I think after the pandemic, many people like this fear started brewing due to the fears of spreading COVID, right? Um, so with someone with OCD, something as simple as touching a doorknob, they start to ruminate and think about, oh my gosh, who else touched this? What germs did they have on their hands? Who did they shake hands with? And it just leads to this spiral of rumination that can feel never ending. So, rumination is essentially, it can look different ways. It could be just thoughts that are just stuck in your mind that don't go away. Oftentimes, it's this series of questioning where you're trying to come to an answer of something that you can't really answer. It's out of your control, right? You don't
Yeah.
know who touched that doorknob. You don't know how many people touched it. It's very likely that many people did, right? Especially if you're in a public place. But you can't know for certain who touched it and where they came from and if they were sick or if they weren't. So the mind will try to find certainty in these situations more as a mode of protection. It's trying to prevent the threat, but it leads to nowhere because it's
Mm-hmm.
completely out of your control.
Mm-hmm.
So one way that I try to support clients is to face their fear. Touch
Mm-hmm.
the doorknob that you're afraid of,
Right.
sit with the discomfort that you're feeling in your body, and
Mm-hmm.
manage the rumination that's occurring. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So part of the sitting with the uncertainty is feeling all those stress hormones in your body. Some clients will describe feeling heart palpitations because of the threat.
Mm-hmm.
Some clients will describe feeling a knot in their throat or sweaty palms because of the threat that they're feeling physically in their body. So, one way I encourage them to manage it is just notice it, allow it to happen, allow it to exist.
Mm-hmm.
What's interesting about our bodies is we go through a process called habituation, right? There's the best example of habituation. I know I'm going a little sideways here, but I'll get back to what we were discussing. Habituation is the process of our body essentially getting used to
Mm-hmm.
some sort of stimulus, right? Or some sort of change. It adapts. So the
Right.
best example of habituation is getting into a cold pool, right? So I know I live in New Jersey, right? We go to the shore in the summer. The water is freezing at the beginning of the summer. By
Mm-hmm.
the end of the summer, it gets a little warmer, but I know early on in the season, you get in, your body is frozen in that water. But
Mm-hmm.
eventually, the longer you wait in the water does get warmer, right? So that's the best example of habituation. If we take that same approach to
Like
facing
acclimating, right?
acclimating, yeah, that's a great word. So your body does acclimate and adapts and adjusts to the cold of the water. It feels like a shock and a threat at first. Your body's probably, or your brain's probably saying, get out of this cold water. What are you doing? It's freezing, right?
Mm-hmm.
But eventually it gets warmer. So the same concept applies to supporting clients with OCD. The longer you sit with your anxiety and allow it to exist, the body naturally wants to reach a place of homeostasis and a sense of calm.
Mm-hmm.
So it will habituate eventually. So the concept, the doorknob example, I
Right.
encourage my clients with contamination OCD to, for example, touch a doorknob and then be with your body as it's experiencing the threat and just allow it to happen. Try
Mm-hmm.
not to run away from it. Try not to go wash your hands to try to make that anxiety go away. You just allow your body to experience the sensations. Eventually, you'll feel a rise in anxiety, right? But eventually it starts to fall. And eventually you notice that, okay, I can manage that. You are teaching your brain and body that you can manage the visceral sensations that come from anxiety. In addition, as rumination is occurring, we also use concepts of like specific skills of how to manage the ruminating thoughts, right? Allow the ruminating thoughts to be there. Tell your brain, I don't have to answer these right now. Go away, OCD. I don't have to answer this right now. You're just trying to ruin my day. So the combination of like allowing your body to go through the process while also telling your thoughts who's boss, essentially,
Yeah.
is the best approach to managing OCD. And slowly, people do get better by facing those fears and recognizing that they have the strength to manage it. The
Yeah.
clarity becomes their own ability to manage as opposed to the certainty of wanting to know who touched that doorknob. if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
So it's so fascinating, right? Because this is like how we're wired. And then when it kind of gets so severe that it gets in the way of us living our everyday life. Like that's like the difference between OCD versus the person that feels stuck in their career. But we're wired the same way. So we're facing the same challenges, just like on a lesser scale, because everything that you describe is a lot of what happens in coaching sessions, right? It's they're ruminating about, well, what am I going to do if this doesn't work out? Like what happens if, and they give me five different scenarios, right, about why that's not realistic. Or they're talking about their identity is tied to some fear that they have. Like, I'm not the kind of person that is going to want to, because this was me, right? Like I was a very introverted person that struggled with social anxiety for a long time. And I had to go out to these salsa socials if I wanted to ever dance,
Yeah,
right?
you
And
totally
it's
face
like,
those fears. Absolutely.
yeah. And so it's all about like, okay, how do I move from, or even like, I'm not the kind of person that goes to CrossFit, or I'm not the kind of person. And it's really just the reason you're not doing the thing is when you try to do that, it's outside of the things that are outside of our comfort zone. Our nervous system is like, not safe, right? And so it's like working through that, it takes some time because it doesn't look like OCD and they're living their life and they're accomplishing things and they're doing well for themselves. It just feels so real to them that this is just how it is. This is realistic thinking. This is, and so it's walking through what do you like really want? Because a lot of the time it's not even feeling the ability to proclaim I really want this because all the things that in their minds are is tied to the thing that they might want
Mhm.
feels like not realistic, not safe, scary, I'm not the type of person, etc.
Mhm.
Right? And so one of the things that I wanted to ask you is, so if it feels really real to them that all these fears, all these realistic thoughts, what are some ways that someone can recognize that what's happening in their body in the moments that they're like postponing taking action, or they're digging into more research about the thing, like how can they have the awareness that what they're doing is really avoiding the discomfort or really avoiding that feeling of being dysregulated? Like how do they have awareness of their nervous system? How do they connect better with themselves and recognize when they're going into their heads to avoid facing what's happening in their bodies?
Oh, that's a great question. And I don't know if there's an exact answer, but to me, the key is just practicing awareness, like an awareness practice. So sometimes getting ahead of it. Some signs could be like a feeling of stuckness, right? A feeling of recognizing that, like, okay, well, I'm not moving forward. Let me take a moment to just go inward. What's happening? Um, Sorry, I had a little feedback for a second, so I heard myself talking back to me. But anyway, in the recording, but let me get back into the moment. I think it's just noticing that there's a stuckness. Okay, I'm not moving forward. This may be my clue to go inward, right? And get
Mhm.
ahead of it. So spending 10 minutes a couple days a week to just really be with your thoughts, essentially a meditation practice can be helpful, right? What's happening in my body physically and just noting it. Wow, I feel a flutter in my stomach right now. What am I thinking about right now? Is there a connection? Asking yourself questions, just being with whatever is happening in the moment. I think a lot of times people think meditation is, I need to sit and clear my mind. Well, frankly, that's impossible, right? Like it is impossible to clear our minds. Our brains are just always thinking, and that's their job. Um, but meditation is actually just sitting with and being with yourself. It's a mindfulness practice. And
Mhm.
mindfulness isn't a fancy term for meditation. It's literally just noticing what's happening from moment to moment without judging it, without trying to control it. You're just allowing whatever is happening to be there. But once you notice what's happening, you could start to make small changes and make choices on taking action, right? But I think it really starts with awareness. Does that answer your question a bit, you think?
So like, so they must, so here's a question. What is the like value of sitting with yourself and like observing what's happening in your body? Like I can, I've met almost, I don't want to say every client, a lot of clients that I have talk about how challenging it is to meditate. And I get what you're saying too. It's like, well, maybe they have a misconception of what meditation is, but sometimes it's like, I just, I'm not, the kind of person that can slow down enough for that, or I can't get my mind to stop, or I don't have the time. Or I don't know what, even me, when I started doing this work, I was like, I don't know what I feel. And so two things, like, what do you say to that person that when you ask, like they ask themselves, what do I feel in my body? When I think about this, or when I feel angry, or I feel sad, or I feel, whatever the feeling is, and they're like, I don't know what I feel. I don't know what I feel in my body, or even how to name the emotion. It's like, what do you say to them about how to connect better with themselves and their bodies to get more emotionally aware? And then the second thing is, what about the person that is like, why? Why should I do that? Like, what's the value of doing that? Like, how does that help them break through some of these challenges of feeling stuck, or of when they want to achieve more and yet they're seeing all the challenges with achieving more, right? Like, how are the two connected?
Great question. I think that's where psychoeducation comes in. There may need to be some examples that need to be given, or other than just opportunities to truly feel it for themselves and allow it to integrate and help them learn in their own way. Um, so first to answer your question, like how would I offer it? One, I think it's a combination of psychoeducation on what skills are needed and how to get there. So an example is sitting with yourself, being present with yourself. It could be as simple as giving yourself a hug and just noticing what that feels like. What's the temperature of your body? How warm does it feel? It could be as simple as that. Just notice what you feel in your senses. What can you touch? What can you see? What can you smell? That's activating the body and just being present with what's happening now, right? So it could be simple exercises like that to just recognize what's happening now. When you practice viscerally and physically feeling what's happening now, it brings you into the present. And
Mm-hmm.
when we're in our heads, it's usually we're in the past or we're in the future. We're not here in the now, right? So
Mm-hmm.
activating the body using tools like your senses to bring into the now is just a practice of presence, to take a pause from being in the past and in the future and out of our heads. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and that teaches the brain visceral ways of just being in the now. So I think the benefits are huge because you viscerally feel what it's like to be now and not stressing about the future and what decisions to make. And it
Mm-hmm.
gives your nervous system a little bit of a rest.
Yeah.
So I think, again, some of it involves specific exercises where a person can truly feel that and experience that. But I think for someone who just doesn't even know what that's like and maybe never felt that before, I think it's just a little bit of psychoeducation, like teaching them the benefits and teaching them about what it might feel like. And being present is a pause to being out of your thoughts that are usually in the future and in the past. So I think it's a combination of both, viscerally feeling it and offering suggestions on how to get there.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's interesting because how how would you explain to someone like what the effects, for example, are of your nervous system being dysregulated, or how to even um, notice that you're dysregulated?
Ooh, so many examples. Let's see. Um, well, panic attacks is one big example, right? I think avoidance is huge. I think a lot of people tend to avoid feeling anxiety. You were talking earlier about like sometimes people's tendencies to like push through, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think there's moments where that could be supportive, but rather than pushing through and ignoring all these visceral signs of anxiety, um, so some common, I guess, visceral signs of anxiety are um, stomach gut issues, right? A lot of people are experiencing gut issues and they don't know why, right? That could sometimes be a sign of stress and anxiety. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Heart palpitations when you don't have any concerns, like medical concerns that could be causing it. Um, just signs of burnout, like complete fatigue.
Mm-hmm.
Um, gosh, there's so many, right? There are little warning signs. Even skin conditions can be a sign of
Mm-hmm.
nervous system dysregulation, like more like hidden signs that you don't necessarily like you may take for granted, right? Like, oh, I have eczema, that could be, or a rash. That could be a sign of stress
Mm-hmm.
and anxiety. Um, but I'm trying to reflect on, I don't know if I'm still on your question, but what are signs essentially
Yeah,
that
like how will someone
anxiety?
notice that they even have a dysregulated nervous system, or that they're avoiding
Mhm.
that feeling of discomfort or fear by pushing through or doing things like that, or ruminating, right? Many times people don't recognize that the rumination is actually the avoidance, right?
Yeah.
Is what I hear you saying.
I think it starts with awareness. And I think this is a tricky question because sometimes it's hard to catch those things on your own, right? Sometimes it does take someone from outside and just saying, hey, I think you're ruminating, right? Like that's why I think working with a therapist or a coach can be so supportive because you just have like a mirror of someone to like maybe offer suggestions like, hey, this seems like this is happening, right? Like,
Hmm.
does it feel this way? So sometimes you do need outside support. I think we all need each other just to reflect those things back. But how can someone catch it on their own? I think just like intense fatigue, feeling stuck, visceral signs like stomach gut issues, skin conditions could be potential anxiety, signs of anxiety. Um, or just intense fear, feelings of fear in certain situations, right? Or intense discomfort. And if you notice yourself avoiding those things, it just starts with awareness of yourself and like taking time to really reflect on your day and or your week.
Yeah.
And like, am I avoiding anything that I'm really afraid of? Just asking yourself these questions could be one way of just noticing it.
So what are some signs that you're avoiding, right? That you're avoiding the discomfort.
So I could use some examples related to people I've worked with in relation to anxiety and OCD. So another aspect of OCD, other than just anxiety and OCD, actually, just an intolerance to uncertainty, like a lot of
Mhm.
difficulty with uncertainty, is doubt is such a huge part of anxiety and OCD. Like OCD is actually the doubting disorder. Most people just question and question and question and doubt everything and will continue to question until they feel like they have an exact answer. But the tricky part is there is sometimes no answer. And all you could
Mhm.
do is take action on what you think could be the best answer at this point in time, and then practice being okay with whatever the consequences are, and then
Mhm.
pivot and navigate as necessary.
Mhm.
But how can you tell you're avoiding? Wait, that was the question, right? I'm sorry, I'm getting a little
Mhm.
sidetracked.
Yeah, how can you tell that because sometimes uh, people that are avoiding the discomfort, me included sometimes, right, aren't even aware that that's what they're doing because our patterns are built so early on as coping mechanisms, right? Even like dissociation is a form of avoiding, right? Avoiding an uncomfortable situation. And maybe you could talk even about that. Like that might be a sign of
Yeah.
avoiding.
Yeah, if you're feeling like you're having like almost an outer body experience or you feel fuzzy because your nervous system is so heightened, that could be your brain's way of just trying to protect you from feeling intense emotions. So that could be a sign of intense burnout or just nervous system dysregulation as well. Um, but another sign that you could be avoiding, I'm going to try to give some examples of what your listeners may be experiencing, like entrepreneurs, for example. I mean, being an entrepreneur is hard, right? You're constantly making decisions for yourself and which way to go, what's the best decision. If you feel like you're not moving forward and you're stuck because you are trying to choose between two different routes and you don't know what the right one is, even what the best one is, do the one that feels, not even feels, but do the one that based on evidence and based on maybe some mentorship is a direction you're willing to take. That is the sign, right? Willing to take. But if you're avoiding making the decision at all, just
Hmm.
observing that, like, I'm feeling stuck. Is this because I'm avoiding a specific decision?
Hmm.
It's a lot of self-reflection and awareness. It always starts with that because when you have awareness, the time and space just slows down just enough to give you a moment to make a choice. But if you're not making the choice, that's avoidance.
Hmm.
You're not taking
Hmm.
the action. That could be a sign of avoidance.
Yeah. As you're talking, two things came up for me. I thought about how avoidance sometimes really comes up a lot when I'm talking to clients. And, as much as my focus is on, finding purpose and thriving in your career, every time that you talk to someone, a major impact is being made on their career because of some relationship, right? Relationships have so much influence on how we feel and how we're doing in our careers. And typically, what I find is actually this dynamic between an avoidant person and an anxious person. I'm talking about, attachment theory, right? But as you're talking about, feeling anxious and avoiding your feelings, I thought about how like this always comes into play because it is somewhat of a related, right? Even if you're anxiously attached, you typically anxious, in other parts of your life too, right? Or if you're avoidant, you might be avoidant in other parts of your life too. And so say what your thoughts are on that and what that looks like in relationship. Like what are the actions you're taking, and how you might see that kind of seep into other areas.
Oh, great question. Attachment theory fascinates me too. And there's actually a theme of OCD called relationship OCD, where people can get really stuck. Like even though they're in a very loving relationship and partnership, they can get very stuck on what to do about the relationship. Like it doesn't make sense because their partner isn't abusive. Obviously, in cases of abuse or disrespect, I think those are factors to consider on whether to leave or stay. But if there's no issues in that department, the person's very loving and present and there for you, people can really question whether to stay or go, and the doubt can just run rampant. So that's actually a theme of OCD that we also treat. But to answer your question about attachment theory, many
Okay.
people with relationship OCD also have attachment wounds, right? So growing, a lot of it usually starts with the way you grow up. Our first attachments are our caregivers, our parents. And depending on how we are raised and the amount of emotional connection or mental emotional support that was available as children, depending on how that went, different attachment styles can be created. So typically, the avoidant person who like some typical examples of how an avoidant person in a relationship may behave is to avoid intimacy, right? To avoid emotional intimacy. Let me not get attached to avoid potentially feeling hurt. And
Mm-hmm.
often signs when they were growing up, or oftentimes when they were growing up, maybe their caregivers were not really emotionally present. And that
Mm-hmm.
was so painful that they want to avoid that from happening. So they have developed coping mechanisms of, well, I'm just not going to get attached at all. I'm going to avoid intimacy at all costs because when I do, I get hurt.
Mm-hmm. What
Right?
does avoiding intimacy look like as far as behaviors? Like how does someone become aware that they're actually avoiding intimacy when it looks like on the surface that they are, in relationship, they are maybe being physically intimate, maybe they are being you know, open, or like what are some signs that they're avoiding real intimacy in relationship?
I think patterns, right? If there's a lot of if there's a pattern of, I guess, situationships and not relationships, right? If there's a tendency to be in a relationship and then at the first sign of essentially like what could be considered a serious partnership,
Uh-huh.
running away from that, right? That could be a sign. Um, at the first sign of someone opening up emotionally, an avoidant person may run away.
So if someone, shares a deep um feeling or experience with an avoidant person, their tendency will be to like emotionally shut down.
Shut down or not want to be present or yeah, absolutely. That could be a sign. Again, I think it depends on who we're talking to here. But what's interesting is to the avoidant person, in their minds, in their bodies, they're just protecting themselves,
Uh-huh.
right?
What are
But
they protecting themselves from?
from getting hurt, right? Because in their minds, their experience with intimacy is, well, that doesn't happen for me based on maybe how they grew up. So I'm going to prevent that from happening because this way I won't get hurt. What's interesting is the anxious attachment style is similar. They're
Mm-hmm.
also trying to protect themselves, but their behavior looks very different. An anxious attachment style will latch on to someone, right? And maybe when they were growing up, they also experienced wounding where the person wasn't emotionally present, right? Or would, I don't know, it's hard to tell, right? Different examples exist, but there was still some sort of wounding in a relationship growing up.
Mm-hmm.
So the anxious attachment style will try to latch on and hold on tight to a person in a
Mm-hmm.
relationship because they're also trying to prevent hurt. Well, if I latch on, they won't go away. If I keep reaching out, they won't go away. And they're trying to prevent hurt and pain. And in their
Right.
minds, in their bodies, what feels safer is to latch on. Does
Yeah.
that make sense, right? It's just like different presentations of the same protective of the same type of protectiveness. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and the protective measures are that avoidance of the like that
Feeling.
discomfort or pain, like a feeling, right? We're avoiding a feeling of some kind. And it's interesting because the anxiously attached typically will have like the ruminating thoughts about all the reasons that this might go wrong. And so what they do is they try to make it so that they're not, right? It's the abandonment wound. It's like they don't want to separate. They don't want to face the hurt of being either emotionally or physically abandoned. And then the avoidant is trying not to get hurt. And so they're like, I'm going to leave before I get hurt. Like I don't want to be hurt in the relationship. And so they're going to start creating distance, right? Emotional distance. And so the dynamic between the two is like one wound is, they don't want to have the closeness because that feels really scary. And the other one is like they don't want to have the separation because that's really scary. And then they feed off of each other.
Yes. So being to answer your question about the being in discomfort, right? Like one aspect of how a therapist or coach may encourage the being with discomfort is for the avoidant partner, practice staying in your relationship.
Right.
Practice allowing deep conversation. What do you feel in your body when that happens? What are the thoughts that are in your mind in this moment when you are sitting in an intimate conversation? Allow that to just be there. Be present with
Mhm.
it, right? What are things you could tell yourself in the moment? And I do want to touch on that for in a second. For the anxious partner, practice being with your partner, not being present for a day, right? Allow
Mhm.
them to go be go do something else without you that day and notice what that
Mhm.
feels like to just sit with that discomfort, right?
Yeah.
And allow that to exist, right? It doesn't mean the relationship's over if they're not present for a few days, right?
Mhm.
Like, so in addition to feeling the discomfort in your body, another key trick here, not trick, but skill, is to really talk back to your worried thoughts, right? Your
Mhm.
worried thoughts are going to be telling you, for the anxious partner, well, if you don't hold on, that person's going to go away, right? They're going to abandon you. You need to make sure you reach out and keep a connection, right? Your
Mhm.
anxious thoughts are going to say that. But what you could say back is they could leave, but maybe they won't, right? Allowing uncertainty to exist. And the best statement that we use oftentimes in treating people with OCD is maybe, but maybe not.
Mhm. Mhm.
Maybe, but maybe not. You can use that statement in any theme of OCD. Whatever your anxious thoughts are saying, you could say, maybe that would happen, but maybe it won't. And I'm going to be in this uncertainty. And I'm going to keep moving forward in this specific task or decision that I've made,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
In the
I love
avoidant
that.
partner, it could be, well, maybe if I have this intimate conversation, I could get hurt. That's the risk I'm taking, but I might not,
Mhm.
right? Like the statement can be used and applied in so many different scenarios, but it's really just a practice of being with the uncertainty and taking action
Mhm.
anyway.
Yeah. I love that you said that because a lot of the times high performers that have been doing the work for a while get into mind work and then they think, oh, I'll just bypass my emotions. I'll just be like, okay, I'm anxious right now. I need to stop being anxious. Or, I have doubt right now. No, I'm gonna focus on possibility. And it's like, yes, managing your thoughts about something is so important. Like, yeah, maybe that could happen, or I could, it could end up working out better than I could have imagined, right? But then they fight the doubt and they fight the anxiousness because they don't want it to be present, and it actually ends up creating more resistance to the feelings and therefore like more internal turmoil. Like what is your experience with that?
Ooh, good question. Well, essentially, it's really just a management and allowing of your body to do its thing, learning and recognizing that it will eventually reach a place of homeostasis. But
Hmm.
avoidance actually fuels the fear more. The more you avoid something, the bigger the fear gets. And I'll use a personal example. When I was a kid, I used to be incredibly afraid of public speaking. I would
Hmm.
get so anxious and nervous to the point where I would shake, my voice would crack. And it's something that I still get a little nervous in public speaking situations, but at a young age, I just remember like knowing, well, if I don't do this, I'll never be good at it, right? Like I just kind of
Hmm.
like had this willpower, like, well, I gotta keep doing it or else it'll just get worse. So I joined Toastmasters, like which is
Oh.
this international organization that supports public speaking. I did that when I was in my early 20s at the start of my career. But in high school and college, whew, it was rough. Um, I had to learn to allow the anxiety that I felt in my chest and my throat during public speaking opportunities. I just had to allow it to be there and work with it instead of avoiding it and never doing speeches. I would have never
Hmm.
been able to become a teacher. I worked at a high school. I was a math teacher for a bit. I was a yoga teacher as well. Like I would have never been able to do those things. I
Yeah.
didn't face the fear of public speaking and just manage the visceral symptoms that were happening in the moment. And that only happens with taking action and doing the thing that scares you.
Yeah.
You'll only viscerally feel it when you face those specific fears. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It does. And it's so important. Like I talk about how things become clearer as you take action. And so really a lot of what we do is work on taking the action, because you know how often like I'll say, okay, well, what's the first step to do that? And it's like, oh, I guess I just got to call the person, or I guess I just got to email the person, or I guess I just got to log into LinkedIn. And okay, so why
Do it.
haven't you? Yeah, what's stopping you from doing it? And it's like, oh yeah, yeah, I'll do it. I'm like, no, 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 like do it now.
Yeah.
It
And
takes
what
two
you're
minutes. It takes two
that's so great. And what you're describing is something that we use in OCD work called a hierarchy, right? So let's say someone's biggest fear is we also work with phobias, right? So a phobia of spiders, for example. The so a hierarchy is essentially like a ladder of fears that we create for a client, where at the bottom of the ladder, it's your initial steps towards reaching your ultimate intention, which is to maybe hold a spider in your hand, right? To face your fear, to hold a spider in your hand without panicking. So at the bottom of the ladder, we're not going to have you put a spider in your hand on day one, right? That's going to be too overwhelming, right? We want to build your nervous system up to get to that point of holding a spider in your hand. So the bottom of the ladder may be looking at a picture of a spider, right?
minutes.
Just be with a picture of a spider and just be present with that. Maybe you'll feel on a scale of 1 to 10, a 3 in regards to an anxiety score. Be with that 3 and just notice how you can sit with that 3. Your mind may start ruminating, like, oh my gosh, what if that spider was in front of me? What would I do? But your mind's just coming in trying to scare you. Be present with the physical sensations you're feeling as you sit with this 3 out of 10 of looking at a picture with the spider. Then you move a little bit more towards the middle of the ladder. Maybe it's watching a video of a spider, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's the next step. Maybe you'll feel a 4. The next step is maybe having a friend put a toy spider on your arm and just feeling the sensations of what a toy spider like a toy tarantula could be crawling up your arm. Maybe you'll feel a 5 or 6 on that one, but slowly you build up your tolerance and ability to sit with the anxiety of that fear.
Mm-hmm.
Then you move up a little more. You have a spider in a cage in front of you and you just look at it.
Mm-hmm.
Just be
Mm-hmm.
present next to a spider. It's not on you, it's not near you.
Yeah.
Maybe that'll feel like a 7 or an 8 until you reach the 10 of holding a spider in your hand. So
Yeah.
slowly you work your way up. And I think what you just described about like taking steps towards the fear, like sending an email, that could be like
Mm-hmm.
a great example of taking the first step for an entrepreneur of whatever decision may need to be made. That's like the bottom of the ladder. You just start there. Slowly that leads to the next step and the next step and the next step. And then you look back and you're like, wow, I did all that.
Yeah, yeah. And you know what, as you were talking about like the steps about, seeing the spider, then being in front of it and all that, I also thought about how like visualization is such a big part of the experience too. Like it's okay, well, okay, can you close your eyes and like imagine yourself on stage? Can you close your eyes, imagine yourself having that conversation and visualizing how it's going to go? What are they going to say? What's coming up? Like really try to place yourself in the situation so that you can kind of make it real, right? Like there is no difference between how our mind interprets what we're imagining versus right what would happen right in front of us.
Especially if it's an intense fear, right? The mind doesn't always know the difference between what's happening in the moment or what we're
Mhm.
imagining. That's why anxiety sometimes comes up and we're like, but nothing's
Right.
happening around
Hmm.
me. It's because you're having
Hmm.
thoughts about it that it can create that same sensation. But yeah, you're describing like that visualization is something we also use as a tool to treat OCD, which is something we call a worry script. We'll have clients like write out a specific narration of their worst fear coming true,
Hmm.
worst case scenario, and utilize your senses in the story, right? Like, what are you seeing? What are you feeling? What are you touching? What are you tasting? What are you smelling? Bring yourself into that story and be with that story. And can you just be present with that outcome for a bit? Because if you can tolerate the worst case scenario imaginatively, maybe you could still move forward and recognize, well, I'll do the best I can and handle it if the worst case scenario happens, but let me move forward anyway. So worry scripts is another example, which reminded me of the visualization example.
Yeah. So, so what's interesting is we talk about coping mechanisms. A lot of the times, what looks like type A, high achieving personality types, like there are actually these coping mechanisms that we develop, right, to avoid discomfort of failure or avoid the discomfort of not being, perfect or avoid discomfort of, being rejected. And what is so hard about getting out of that pattern, I've noticed, is a lot of times it's worked so well to get us to where we are, right? Where people have built a really satisfying, or I wouldn't say satisfying, but high achieving career, right? Like they have on the surface what looks like great success. They have their companies, they've built their companies, but they've done it on the basis of worry, over managing things to make sure that nothing can possibly go wrong, right? It's like it serves us for so long that then it becomes like so like hard that you can't imagine letting that go. Like, no, this is the right way. Like, this is how I got here. And then it's like to take the calculated risks, right, of trying to go to the next level. It feels like, no, that feels too out of control, right? Like to hire people that take over your, to delegate your highest accounts or to um like take that extra step of making the big ask, right? To do the thing that is outside of your comfort zone that leads to the 10x growth feels like unmanageable, but it's because so long it's worked for us to be this way. It's like, okay, all the worry, all the overthinking, over analyzing, perfectionism. Look how successful I've become, and this
Because
is my
of this. Yeah.
secret. Yeah,
Right.
it's because of because I'm on top of everything all the time, and I do it all myself. I'm, really successful. And now it's like to get out of that pattern is that getting, comfortable with that discomfort.
And at what
And
cost, right? Like at what cost? I think it's also important to reflect on that because some people do get energized by that, right? It could feel very energizing, but then reflect on your life too. Like how's your health? How's, right? How are your relationships? Like what is falling to the wayside maybe because of this energy that you're putting into worrying and staying on top of everything. It depends. Some
with the
people maybe,
joy, right?
right, where's the joy? And I think it just depends because some people maybe are able to manage that. But is it effective? How is it working for you? Just these reflective questions can be really telling to really just discern, well, like, okay, yeah, this worry and pushing through maybe got you this far, but is it effective? How is it working for you now? Right? I just
Hmm.
think it all starts with that self-reflection and awareness.
Yeah,
Um, but it's tricky. I think everyone has a very different story. But it all starts with self-reflection and deciding how is this working for me? Right? How do
yeah,
I want my life to look and how do I
right,
want to feel? And
right.
will I absolutely feel this way? Maybe, maybe not. But
Yeah.
how can I just work towards that?
Yeah, yeah, it's so important, and to really have clarity on that before you have clarity on the steps, right? Like, how do I want to feel? What do I want my life to look like? Who do I want to become? And it's yeah, it's so powerful because we are a lot of times just taking action within the like the barriers of our tolerance that we've built up. And so there is like a pushing through that tolerance, but what I found to be most powerful with clients that are trying to get to that next stage and trying to rebuild their identity and doing that hard thing after they've done so much other hard stuff is to like really sit with them and help them feel seen, right? Like it's like of course you're feeling doubt right now. Of course you're feeling fear right now. Of like look at, what led you here and to actually allow them the space to like sit with their discomfort, like their fear, their anxiety, their um, frustrations. And then once they've felt it, it just becomes so much easier, right, to move forward and to take the courageous step.
Yeah.
But if you try to bypass that, I found that the more you bypass your feelings and the more you just kind of like, no, you just got to push through and you become so disconnected from yourself. And then you stop get having that clarity, right, about what you actually want, and you look outside for what you think you should be doing,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. I like to think of the mind and body as like a constant collaboration. Like you're
Oh,
constantly collaborating, like the two are constantly collaborating, I should say. The body houses the mind, right? And the mind supports the body. Like, how can you work together instead of the mind just constantly like overpowering the body and just saying, come on, come with me, right? Like, we're doing this.
yeah,
And the body's like, wait, I'm tired, right? Like how do you work
right. Yeah.
together? And like we don't know what we don't know until we know it. I like to say that all the time. And back to your example of like, well, yeah, pushing through has gotten me this far. Okay, it's gotten you this far, but how's that working for you? If something's not working, be open to learning a new way of doing things, right? And maybe you'll need support through a coach or therapist to help you get there. But be open to potentially learning other strategies and ways of just being in your discomfort, facing the fears, doing something else anyway. It could be an intense fear to not feel worried and in control all the time.
Right,
Purposely putting yourself in a situation that feels out of control could be an
right.
exposure in itself, right? Of
Yeah,
just being present and managing that.
yeah.
So yeah, I mean, there's so much I could talk about this for hours and
Yeah.
hours because there's so many different avenues you could take and so many different themes that can come up around
Hmm.
worries and fears. And there's so many different like ways of managing it. But I think first, ultimately, the most general statement I can offer is practice understanding what your fears are and what may be keeping you stuck. How are your fears holding you back? How can you practice being with your body and experiencing the physical sensations of your fears? Noticing them, allowing them rather than pushing through, allowing and taking steps anyway
Hmm.
by slowly pushing your edges without overwhelming yourself. And how can you offer statements to help manage the thoughts too? Like, well, maybe something terrible will happen, but maybe it won't. But I'm going to try my
Right.
best anyway, right? And have clarity that I'll be okay and figure it out.
Yeah. You gave me an analogy about the forest, I believe, right?
Ah, yes, yes, yes.
I wanted to make sure we get to it before we go because I
Yes.
think it's the best way to kind of wrap that
Oh, yeah,
up.
I forgot about that. No, for sure. So what's interesting is when it comes to treatment of anxiety, and especially OCD work, when it comes to OCD, certain behaviors get ingrained as typical ways of relieving stress, right? Back to the doorknob example. Washing your hands immediately after touching a potentially dirty doorknob feels relieving, and that becomes a habit that gets ingrained, ingrained, ingrained. So using this analogy that I love to use, I love to hike. So when we go on hikes on marked trails, right? They're color coded, they're there's no brush, right? Like they're well paved. You just follow the path. It's easy, right? It's easy to navigate that path.
Mhm.
Now, when you're learning a new behavior, a new way of responding or navigating the world, you may have to go off trail, right? And what happens when we go off trail on a hike? There's brush, there's bushes, there's thorns, there's trees, and you have to kind of like dig through the brush to get through. Certainly way harder, right? Like it's a lot easier to go down the paved path. But if you keep foraging through the brush, you'll eventually create somewhat of a path. Maybe you need some sort of tool to help you clear the brush. Okay, keep clearing it. the more you go over that path, the clearer it becomes. Eventually, it becomes a clear path that's easy to navigate, but at first, it's really hard to push through. And I like to
Mm.
use that metaphor when I'm working with people who are learning new ways of responding or new behaviors, because at first it's hard. You got to clear that brush out, and it's tiring and more taxing than just taking the path that's already paved. But if you create the new path, it'll eventually be easier, right?
Yeah.
You may need some tools along the way, but it will eventually be easier. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I like to use that metaphor a lot.
I thought about it because you talked about, being open to new ways. And one of the tools that I love to use is curiosity. And
Mhm.
it's kind of like, I wonder what would happen if I did that, like just like, well, what might that look like? Or what might that curiosity? And it's like walking down the path. It's like, okay, well, if I just stick to the path, this is how it's always been. This is safe, right? And then it's like, oh, I wonder what's over there. To use curiosity to try to open your mind to new ways of thinking, new ways of behaving, new ways of, perceiving the methods that you've used in the past. Like it's knowing that it's this unknown territory, but it could lead to, you know, the waterfall, right? Where this path is just maybe it's going around in circles, right? Like,
Like super
but
winding where you have a more direct route if you pave the way. Absolutely. It could be. But I think
you
that
get
the
to the
biggest
source, right?
thing, yeah, I think the biggest thing too is just recognizing that it could work out, but it might not. But again, it
Yeah,
always ends up being faith on yourself to navigate whatever obstacles come. Like it just ends up, you build more clarity on your ability, if that makes sense, to
yeah.
manage.
Like Marie Forleo says, right? Everything is figure outable.
Oh, I love that. Yes, absolutely.
Awesome, Christina. This has been amazing. Thank you so much. It's always so interesting to talk to you because we are really all wired the same. And even though you're working with clients that have these challenges on a very extreme level, I think all of us kind of struggle with similar fears and anxieties and, avoidance of discomfort that keeps us stuck. And it's just so insightful to understand how, the brain works and how our nervous system works and how we can kind of manage it and learn more about it so that we can help, regulate ourselves and help talk to ourselves in a kinder way that allows us to push forward and move towards our dreams. And so this has been a treat and a pleasure. And I love to pick your brain about this stuff. And like you said, we could talk about it forever. But I did want to just wrap up because that does kind of put it all together and I loved it and I think everybody that listens is going to relate to some parts of this, right?
Absolutely. No, thank you for having me. I just find this topic so fascinating and I agree. I see how it can really tie into the work that you do. So just thank you for having me and just it was really nice. I appreciate everything you do and thank you.
Thanks so much, Christina. I will see you next time.
Yes, for sure. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning into today's episode of Courage and Purpose. I hope today's insights inspired you to take bold action and align your life and career with what truly matters to you. If you're ready to dive deeper, I invite you to download my free Action Indicator Assessment, a powerful tool to help you uncover what's holding you back and take the next step towards clarity and confidence. Just visit www.lifeonpurpose.coach/action indicator to get started today. If you found value in today's episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with someone who could use a little extra courage on their journey. Until next time, stay true to your purpose, lead with courage, and keep thriving. I'll see you in the next episode.